SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Government for on that. Slide 16 talks about the technical standards that exist today as far as accessibility is concerned. I have restricted my findings to technology related standards. We've discussed Web Content Accessibility Guidelines WCAG. These were released by the World Wide Web Consortium and the current version is 2.1. There is an authoring tool accessibility guidelines. These guidelines are more useful for authoring tools such as Captivate or any other web tool like Adobe WordPress, the WordPress website builder. Then there is user agent accessibility guidelines. These are useful for something like a media player, how to ensure accessibility of them. Accessible rich internet application, these are also known as ARIA. Today the web has evolved, there are a lot of rich application. So these standards provide recommended guidelines on making rich internet applications more accessible. There is also independent user interface accessibility guidelines. There is EPUB guidelines for making electronic publication documents, EPUBs more accessible. There is also the PDF UA guidelines which talks about how to make the most ubiquitous document format PDF more accessible. So a number of standards today already exist globally. Some of them have also been incorporated in India in GIGAW. So really you could look up on the internet and find these resources. I would encourage you to go through them. This would help you get an understanding for the needs of how to make your technology more accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities. And mind you, many of them are not rocket science. In fact, it's very simple. In most cases, you would find that these are common sense, these are best practices, but often common sense is also not very common. So we often tend to kind of miss out on best practices and we like to kind of take the shorter route and just get our work done. But just take that a little extra time, go through these guidelines. This will help save you a lot of ordeal, because now even in India we do have a mandate for accessibility, and it is pretty much applicable for all sort of companies including the private sector. So sooner or later you would, if you are someone who's developing any kind of a technology, whether it is on the desktop or for the mobile phones or on any other interface, you may be required to kind of adhere to these guidelines. And now that you have kind of experienced this particular session, I would strongly encourage you to read these guidelines. This will help you to become more accessible. So really the slide 17, we really trying to understand how different stakeholders like the government, business and civil society, what they have done so far. And what I've really tried to do here is try to do a kind of some little of analysis, and would be saying what are the good things or the highlights or the lowlights that the government or the stakeholders have done in this space. We start with the government, and really if I have to say, of course the government has been taking a lot of effort, and if I have to really see the highlights, passing of the RPWD Act was definitely one such thing, which did provide a big mandate for for accessibility, which covered a private sector. So definitely that's one big highlight. The government has been setting up various task committees, including most recently they have kind of set up a task committee in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and TRAI to understand, in the case of information broadcasting, they want to see how television can be made more accessible. So they're exploring the use of sign language and audio description there. TRAI had a more wider mandate, and they actually completed their round of consultation last year, and we'll be kind of seeing through some of their recommendation very soon. But yes, so government has taken steps towards that. They have revised the GIGAW guidelines. The Department of Empowerment for People with Disabilities have announced that there are more than 100 websites that they've been able to make accessible. I think that's a landmark achievement, and we need to applaud the government for the effort. Clearly, a lot more needs to be done. By some estimate, there are roughly about 8 to 10,000 websites under different departments and ministries and PSUs. So, of course, 100 is the first step, and we still need to go a long way before accessibility is incorporated in all those websites, government apps and website. Lowlights, we still do not have a very a holistic view of it. We still have a very patchy thinking as far as accessibility. It's often very reactive and not very proactive in nature. So the government needs to be pushed, and they would react or take certain action. We still do not have a holistic policy or a guideline on assistive product at a larger scale, which really cuts across different stages, from research to encouraging manufacturing to distribution, or making things more available in the country. We don't have that kind of a thinking yet evolved in the country. ADIP, there is a scheme called ADIP with the government, and it is being carried out by the Department of People with Disabilities. They distribute a lot of products under ADIP scheme, but 80% of those products are largely for the products which are procured by Alimco, and these Alimco products are like wheelchairs and crutches, and many of them, they're not so much on IT, and the list of products is also not often updated. It is the last, I think, the revision happened in 2013. Clearly, when technology is evolving so fast, ADIP schemes like ADIP should also need to be updated far more frequently. It largely caters to few disabilities, and many other disabilities needs are not taken care into. Accessible India campaign, while it was a wonderful campaign, but really the implementation left a lot more wanting. It has not yet been fully, the objectives have not yet been fully actualized, and we need to, still go travel a long way when these objectives could be materialized. A huge number of buildings, many places they have not even done access audit. A huge number of places where they've completed access audit, there was no action kind of executed on it. So many websites were supposed to become accessible, but just about 100 or so have become accessible. There's so much of emphasis today in the government on digital India, e-governance, but accessibility really is very low in the priority. So definitely a lot more desired as far as government and ICT implementation is concerned. As we discussed just a while ago, the government, or the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which is the regulator for telecom services in India, they conducted an extensive consultation in 2017 and 18. They invited representation or opinion from a variety of organizations, including telecom service providers like Airtel and Vodafone. They also invited the direct-to-home service providers like the Tata Sky or Dish TV and internet service providers. So a lot of these people kind of provided their inputs, and so was the disability sector, invited to give in their recommendations to TRAI. Now they have kind of released a recommendation in July, and some of the recommendations that they have kind of given here are it recommends that India should have a steering committee under the aegis of Department of Empowerment for People with Disabilities, and which should be more cross departmental, cross ministerial in nature, and should have representation from Ministry of Electronics and IT, Corporate Affairs, Ministry of Consumer Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Standards. So all this ministry needs to be kind of should be participating in that particular committee, and should have a more holistic thinking in this subject. The government should mandate device manufacturers to create at least one of the product SKUs which have universal design principles and they are accessible for all. If you are a telecom services provider or internet service provider or even a cable operator, you should have a specialized desk or a call center or provide training to your staff to cater to the needs of people with disabilities. We often seen when people with disabilities call the call center and they ask about, they give their concerns, the staff is just not able to understand those queries. So yes, the TRAI recommends that the contact center staff needs to be better oriented and equipped to take to the needs of people with disabilities. It also talks about emergency services and how they should become more accessible and inclusive. India has created their own 911 number. It's called 112. It is at early stages of rollout, and of course it's going to become very essential. So how can we make this very important services more inclusive? How do we make it multimodal in nature, so that say somebody who's deaf can also reach out to them maybe through SMS or chat, and somebody who can actually reach out to them through call or even any other thing. So yes, it needs to be a far more robust, multimodal in nature, and should be able to kind of cater to the needs, because emergency services will be taking, they'll be dealing with lives, they'll be responding to situation of disaster, and if we are not able to kind of make them exclusive, we're talking inclusive enough, we will be actually causing huge problems for them. Continuing with second part of the recommendation, it also recommends that there should be accessibility standards for other products like phones and other types of electronics. A certain percentage of all channels content should be developed with audio description and sign language included. In 5 years, any mobile manufacturer who produces 5 or more mobiles in the country must have at least one phone or device which meets the accessibility criteria. All TV set-top box service providers should have at least one a set-top box version which is more accessible and has accessibility features incorporated in it. And of course, lastly, it also mentioned about government when they procure any product, ICTs, they should ensure that they are accessible right from at the procurement stage. So they should be encouraging this. The next stakeholder that I would want to talk about is the business. Really, we discussed earlier that now, thanks to RPWD Act and the wider definition that it has taken, clearly the private sector has come to the fold of it, and thus all the accessibility features are also equally applicable for people, for the private sectors. And private sector really includes anything from a sole proprietorship to a partnership or a factory or an NGO or an association of people or a private limited company or a public limited company. All these kind of are included in the definition. So clearly nobody is out of the definition. And of course, if we really look at some of the highlights and the lowlights, there has been some effort especially by industry bodies like such as NASSCOM and FICCI in terms of creating more awareness on RPWD Act and the provisions and what it means for those sector companies. We've also seen a lot of these startups and tech-based companies who have invested in AI and have tried to create early stage products like Seeing AI. It was a software application developed by Microsoft using artificial intelligence for the low vision and the blind community. Similarly, there are other applications such as ID by Gingermind Technologies or 6x6 by Barrier Break, which again use technology for and things like AI to overcome barriers for people with disabilities. Lowlights is limited awareness of RPWD Act. In spite of a lot of effort, a lot of awareness needs to be built more around RPWD Act and its applicability on the private sector. There's no sense of urgency. We discussed June of 2019 is the deadline by which more services ought to become accessible as far as RPWD Act is concerned, but really the needle hasn't moved fast enough, and there's very little sense of urgency as far as creating more inclusive or making their services more inclusive for people with disabilities is concerned. Corporate CSR, now India CSR is a very powerful tool. It can provide resources for a huge number of initiatives, but still CSR has not caught on to the bandwagon of accessibility. Maybe the schedules, it will be good to have some more clarity in the Schedule 7, which really lists down the kind of activities that the companies can support. So maybe an emphasis on accessibility in Schedule 7 can be very useful, and by providing CSR can support accessibility in a major way. For instance, they can support research related activities, they can support in auditing, they can support in procuring certain goods and services. So there is a huge potential, an untapped potential where CSR can make a big impact. And mind you, some organization, for instance, Emphasis, they have been taking some amazing efforts in this space. And now Emphasis through their CSR program has collaborated with Uber Technologies, and they have actually launched Uber Assist and Uber Access cabs in Bengaluru. Uber Assist provides drivers training on how to help people with disabilities when they take a ride with them and when they have taken option of Uber Assist. And then there is Uber Access. They are specially designed cars which has features like AmbiLift and wheelchair lock. So people who are on a wheelchair and they find it difficult to transfer, they can actually use those cars and they can actually mobilize within the city. So yes, these are some of the highlights and the lowlights. As I mentioned, for the corporates or the business, there's a huge untapped potential, and they can leverage people with disabilities or focus in many areas. Some of these are kind of mentioned here. They can be a very active workforce. We talked about 15% of population being disabled, 1 billion globally, nearly 200 million in India. So they can be a source of employees for you. They bring diverse thinking in your organization. So definitely that's an area of opportunity for the business. Second is seeing people with disabilities as a consumer base. And there was a study done, and they said that people with disabilities and their immediate social circle influence a total disposable income of about $8 trillion. That's far higher than the total GDP of India. Now, if I give you an example, now in my home, we often use Amazon over Flipkart because we find Amazon a little more accessible. So because I use Amazon, my family, we've all kind of pivoted around this. So my wife, my parents, everybody else have started using that application, not because of the better deals that we get here, but it's also actually because Amazon is more accessible, and because I find it more comfortable to use with my assistive technology. We've all kind of graduated or pivoted towards the use of Amazon, and this is one such example. There are many others, and it holds true in many other services, including transportation or food tech or banking. Accessibility really forms an important criteria as far as when we select a particular service provider, and it just does not impact me or my brother who are user of assistive tech, but it also impacts the purchase decision for the whole family. So clearly this number is not a misnomer, it's not an exaggeration. By making your products more inclusive and accessible, you actually tend to get access to their immediate friends and family members. And really, from an assistive tech market, the estimate says that the market is as big as $26 billion. It's a huge market, and where we need a lot of innovation, and especially in India, where we do not have enough technology available coming in from the West. It's important that we invest in this space and we try to find out solutions, assistive tech, ICT products, which really helps us overcome these barriers. And one of the ways of doing it, you may want to, of course, you may want to take up specific problems and build solutions around it. But the other way of doing it is also that if you are engaged in building a particular product or a service, you make sure that that is accessible, that is inclusive for people with disabilities. By doing so, you anyways kind of traveled certain distance as far as making your products and ICT more inclusive for people with disabilities, and really breaking a big wall as far as exclusion is concerned. So huge potential. It's definitely an untapped opportunity, really, if you look at it from a market point of view or even from a talent resource point of view. Slide 22, civil society, and I think this is where all our responsibility comes in, and as individuals, as civil society groups, NGOs, what can be done, what have been happening. We have seen a lot of academia like IIT Delhi, IIT Bangalore, who have actually taken up accessibility as a important stream. They are working on setting up a center of excellence. IIT Delhi has created something called a smart cane. They've created a braille book, a kind of a braille laptop which actually can create content and consume content in braille. They've also they're also trying to work something to do with making or making bus transport more accessible for the blind community. Similarly, IIT Bangalore has been incubating non-profits like Friends for Inclusion and Vision Empower, who are working in the area of technology, and they've been trying to support them in terms of building more accessible solutions. So yes, there are some efforts happening as far as academia is concerned. There is some effort as far as to bring together an ecosystem. So organizations like Enable India and Samarthanam have announced that they will be setting up an ecosystem. They're bringing different stakeholders together on a common platform and see how assistive products can be more more researched upon, more made widely available, made more affordable. Of course, there are newer NGOs like Friends for Inclusion, Vision Empower, XRCV, many others who are trying to actually take technology much more seriously and see how it can be leveraged for making people, or leveraged to enable people with disabilities or overcome certain barriers. Low lights. Definitely, I think we ourselves haven't really pushed for advocacy or the importance of assistive products or an assistive policy, assistive products policy at a larger level. Countries like the US has a board called an Access Board, which really influence accessibility in a lot of activities. But in India, we don't have something like this, so we need to really drive that a lot more with a lot more vigor and excitement. We have very limited exposure to understand new technologies, assess in what scenarios it's best useful. There is very little awareness, very little information available on the internet also. The NGOs do not have that kind of a capacity. They're not trained enough. They do not have the skills. So yes, that's a big problem. A lot of our efforts is very fragmented. It's not very it's not very consistent in nature. So as a result, again, not much gets achieved. A lot of things are actually they get started, but then they remain in limbo because we do not have a larger view of things. We do not have a consistent view of things. So yes, from civil society, these are certain analysis. Slide 23, and we are coming closer to the end of our presentation. And here's where I've kind of jotted down certain points on the way forward, on what could be the possible focus areas for the government, for the business, for the civil society. So some of the points that we have kind of listed out here are, at the government, really we really strongly recommend that all ministries should start seeing disability as a core activity. People with disabilities exist everywhere and their needs are also equal as anybody else. So people with disabilities also need health, people with disabilities also need education, people with disabilities also need employment. So Ministry of Health, Ministry of HRD, Ministry of Labour, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, they all need to have disability included. They need to have a disability unit established, and they should be able to kind of take care of the need of people with disabilities. According to an analysis that I did a while ago, about 26 such ministries can have a dedicated person or a dedicated unit for disability. Of course, the next important step is that we should adopt a very strong procurement standard. For procurement, I think we discussed enough about the importance of procurement, how it can actually create a positive ripple effect. by having accessibility as a mandatory requirement in procurement of government services, products and services. So European standards are very good benchmark. Perhaps we should look at emulating them, adapt it to suit our requirement, but definitely accessibility should become a non-negotiable part of the procurement practice at the government. We definitely need both as the government, business and the civil society, we need to focus on being more aware on the RPWD Act and strengthen its implementation around each at each stage, at each level. So it's very crucial that we build more awareness and we strengthen the implementation of it. The government was supposed to set up a Universal Design Institute, so and this was committed in the 12th five-year plan, but not much has been achieved in that front. So it's important that we kind of fast track the implementation of it, and as you know, we really encourage more research on building more standards or building more products which are more inclusive and more accessible in nature. ADIP scheme we extensively discussed. ADIP needs to be revamped, it needs to be made more robust, it needs to take into the need of a wider range of disabilities. It need to update products more regularly. You just cannot have a certain list being created and do not being updated for many years. Technology is improving at a breakneck speed, so we need to make sure that the ADIP scheme is also able to keep pace to it and able to accommodate the needs of people basis the advances in technology. We need, of course, ADIP needs to be revamped as far as making it more functional in nature. The way it happens today is that there's a one size fits all. So there's a very similar wheelchair that is being given to everybody without having to understand what kind of a solution do they need, what type of wheelchair do they need with an extra cushion, or do they need a lightweight wheelchair, do they need more agile, or do they need something more sturdy. I think that needs to be understood. So ADIP scheme needs to be made more objective, and instead of taking a very mass based approach, we need to look at making it more personalized. We should have more financial incentives, so the government should be actually looking at providing tax incentives, GST, maybe through GST, maybe through income tax, but really more incentives on creating more inclusive products. So this would really encourage OEMs or any other startups, if they are in an accessibility or assistive product space, and if they can be incentivized, that can be very important and very critical. Even from a consumer point of view, I think it's a good idea to see if we can subsidize not only through ADIP scheme but also for those who are buying. So somebody who has a certain who's able to afford, but if through income tax, if we can provide a certain subsidy or a rebate if you have procured certain assistive products, I think that could be very useful. Financial incentives is another important area that can be looked into for encouraging more assistive products and solutions for people with disabilities. With that, I really come to an end of my presentation. Clearly, people with disabilities are an important part of our society. They form a huge base. 15% is not small. It really translates into 1 in 7 person who has a disability. They may range from something very milder to something more severe, and So we need to really start accepting that people with disabilities are part of our life, and we all need to understand that the problem really doesn't lie with them. It really is a lot more outside. It's because of the barriers that we have created because of poor design that we have incorporated. So a building is not accessible not because of person who's not able to walk, but because we do not have ramps and lifts or accessible washrooms. Similarly, a product or an application is not usable by a person with disability, not because they are blind or they have a certain disability, but because the developers have failed to incorporate accessibility standards in them. So one needs to focus a lot more on accessibility. One needs to take care of the needs of people with disabilities. As developers, I would encourage you to look up on the web on accessibility standards in the area that you're working in. Whether you are a civil engineer who's trying to work with the buildings, or you are a computer science graduate, or somebody who's going to work in the field of AI or Internet of Things, there are accessibility standards in most cases. Look up and see how you can incorporate certain best practices. Really, and it's really not rocket science. It's fairly doable. All that one needs to do is be more aware, and once you're more aware, I'm sure you will be able to take care or understand the needs of people with disabilities. And it's just that one small effort can actually make a huge difference. So with this, I would like to take a pause, and I know it may sound a cliche, but remember, you can make a difference. You can make a difference in the life of 15% of the population who have been marginalized for a very long time. So please take care, have a wonderful time, and do remember people with disabilities do exist, and we need to come together, and together we will be able to create a more inclusive and an accessible environment. With this, I'm Ankit Rajiv Jindal signing off. Thank you.